Why did they laugh when she walked past? Why did their eyes follow her like she didn't belong, as if her presence itself was an inconvenience? Marissa Cole had asked herself those questions 100 times since arriving at Fort Ironvale, and every time the answers hurt a little less. You don't bleed energy into ignorance, she told herself. You save it for the battles that matter. But on mornings like this, as the wind carved across the parade ground and the training field hummed with tension, it was hard not to feel the weight of every whisper. Medic. The word wasn't even spat. It was tossed carelessly like a discarded wrapper as a group of cadets brushed past. One snickered, another coughed out a mocking ma'am, and they all laughed as they walked away. Marissa didn't respond. Her boots remained perfectly aligned beneath her. Her hands, clasped behind her back, didn't twitch. Only her eyes moved steady, forward, locked on nothing and everything at once. They didn't know who she was. That was the point. 2 weeks ago, she'd been transferred here from Medicorps Division, a move nobody questioned aloud but everyone speculated about. She had no record of disciplinary issues, no demotion, no scandal. Yet here she was, standing shoulder to shoulder with cadets 5 years her junior, starting from scratch in a program designed to shape future leaders. And in a world that worshipped visible power, Marissa's calm was treated like weakness. Lieutenant Derek Lawson made sure of that. Transfer, huh? His voice slithered over her shoulder, loud enough for the others to hear. 26, broad-shouldered, jaw like it had been carved for recruitment posters. Lawson had been top of his class in every exercise so far. He wore his arrogance like body armor. Sergeant Cole, Marissa corrected without looking at him. Not here, he said, his smirk cutting like a knife. Here, you're just another cadet trying to keep up. Laughter exploded around them, and for a heartbeat, something old and cold twisted in Marissa's chest. The part of her that had buried too many friends to explain. The part that remembered what it felt like to be underestimated and how useful that underestimation could be. She breathed once deeply, then let the moment pass. That night, as the others swapped jokes in the mess hall, she sat alone by the far window with a cup of bitter coffee cooling in her hands. Beyond the glass, the perimeter lights glowed against the darkness. She watched them in silence, the same way she watched everything, searching for small details, tiny shifts, signs of something out of place. It was a habit she'd never shaken, even here. Somewhere deep inside, the old instincts still hummed. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she felt them stir. It began with a flicker, barely noticeable, just a brief sputter of light along the west perimeter camera. 1.7 seconds, long enough for a trained eye to see, too short for anyone else to care, but Marissa did. Later, while the cadets stumbled through another round of combat drills, she found her gaze drifting to the tree line beyond the field. It wasn't the taunts she was ignoring. It was the ridge above them, the one with just enough elevation to conceal a scope. It was nothing. It was probably nothing. But she wrote it down anyway, in a small, battered notebook filled with dozens of other nothings that often turned out to be something. It was the same notebook she carried on every mission, and though none of these cadets would ever know it, that book had once saved 12 men. By the end of the second week, the insults had turned into routine. Medic hands, bandage queen, probably begged for this slot. Lawson's voice was always the loudest, his jokes always the cruelest, but Marissa's silence never broke. Because the louder he got, the less she had to say. Then, during a locker room debrief, something happened that shifted the ground beneath her quiet. As she folded her uniform into her locker, crisp, exact, like a ritual, a small patch slipped free from the inner lining and hit the floor. Maya Alvarez saw it first. Corporal Alvarez was sharp, observant. She didn't laugh when the others did, and when she crouched to pick up the patch, her fingers paused over the faded stitching. Shadow Viper Unit. 3 words, nothing more, but they froze her breath in her chest. She heard those words before, whispered during a late-night briefing, mentioned only in hushed tones. A ghost unit. An operator whose missions didn't make it into reports. A myth. And here it was in her hands. She slipped the patch back without a word. Marissa accepted it without a glance, slid it into her jacket, and walked out like nothing had happened. But Maya knew something had. The following evening, as cadets filed into the strategy hall for a scheduled briefing, the projector stuttered and died mid-load. A murmur rippled through the room. Before the instructor could react, a low chime echoed across the hall, the unmistakable tone of a secure authorization request. Restricted access, login authorization code. The words glowed across the console. The instructor frowned, typing frantically, but the system refused the override. Then, as abruptly as it had appeared, the message vanished. Marissa's tablet buzzed once. No sender, no subject, 4 words. Shadow Viper, stand by. Her pulse skipped. The room faded into background noise. Across the aisle, Maya watched her. She saw the slight tightening in Marissa's jaw, the way her hand hovered just above the screen, the controlled breath that followed. Maya didn't know what Shadow Viper really meant, but she knew enough to realize that whatever Marissa Cole was hiding, it wasn't small. Hours later, long past curfew, Marissa sat cross-legged on her bunk with that same notebook open across her lap. Its pages were filled with coordinates, timestamps, surveillance notes, a map of patterns no one else had even seen. At the bottom of the newest entry, she'd written a single line. Shadow Viper, 01, authorization active. For the first time in 7 years, the name was awake again. And miles away, deep in a sealed operations center beneath Quantico, a red alert rippled across encrypted networks. Colonel Victor Hale stood frozen before the message on his console. Shadow Viper Protocol, REACTIVATD. The words seemed to pull the air from the room. Shadow Viper, he whispered, the syllables tasting like memory and gunpowder. When the morning came, Fort Ironvale felt different. The jokes were quieter, the laughter thinner. Even Lawson's swagger had a slight tremor beneath it. Something was happening and none of them knew what. Except Marissa. She walked the hallways the same as before, calm, steady, unreadable. But inside, a storm was building. Because when Shadow Viper appeared on a secure line, it was never by accident. It meant something was moving, and she had no choice but to move with it. Then just as the day's exercises began, the lights flickered. Once, twice. The hall went dark. 7 seconds later, the power returned, and every monitor in the room pulsed with a new message. Cole Victor Hale, inbound. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A hush fell over the cadets as the faint echo of boots approached from the corridor beyond. Slow, deliberate, heavy. The doors swung open. Colonel Hale stepped into the hall, his presence cutting through the air like a blade. The medals on his chest weren't decorations, they were scars in metal. His eyes swept the room before locking onto Marissa. Shadow Viper, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it hit like thunder. Stand by. Every head turned. Lawson blinked in confusion. Wait, what? Sergeant Marissa Cole, Hale continued, front and center. She rose, not hurried, not shaken, just precise, the way she had been taught years ago, long before Fort Ironvale. Good to see you again, Hale said when she reached him. Then louder for all to hear, Shadow Viper. The silence was so complete it rang. And then the truth. 7 years ago, Dawson Ridge. A covert rescue operation written off as a lost cause, 12 Marines trapped, no air support, no reinforcements, no chance. Until one operator, call sign Shadow Viper, led a 4-person team into the heart of hostile ground. 47 minutes later, all 12 Marines walked out alive. She didn't inherit that name, Hale said. She earned it, she carved it, and she saved my life. The room changed in that moment. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when arrogance is stripped bare and replaced by respect. Lawson's face drained of color. He tried to speak, but Hale's gaze pinned him to his seat. "You mocked her," the colonel said, his voice soft and sharp as steel. "You called her weak. You never asked who she was." One by one, the cadets rose to their feet. Salutes snapped into the air like thunderclaps. For the first time since she'd arrived, Marissa Cole wasn't invisible. She wasn't the medic. She wasn't the outsider. She was Shadow Viper, and the entire base now knew it. Yet even in that moment of revelation, Colonel Hale leaned closer and whispered something that made her blood run cold. "They see it now," he said, "but this isn't about them. Someone watching this base, someone who shouldn't be." Marissa's heartbeat steadied, her eyes narrowed. The storm was coming. "Then it begins again," she whispered. And just like that, Shadow Viper was back. Why did the alarm sound at 02:13, when every training routine was locked down and every door was supposed to be sealed? Why did the base's sensors, systems designed to detect movement miles away, suddenly scream from the inside? Marissa Cole was already awake when the sirens erupted. She hadn't slept much since Colonel Hale's words. "Someone's watching this base." They looped in her mind like a warning on repeat. She sat on the edge of her bunk, boots half-laced, encrypted tablet glowing faintly beside her. 4 words pulsed across its screen: "Shadow Viper, stand by." And then the alarm shattered the night. Within 60 seconds, the orderly hum of Fort Ironvale dissolved into chaos. Doors slammed. Shouted orders echoed down metal corridors. Floodlights bathed the compound in cold white light. Marissa was already on her feet, sidearm clipped to her thigh, tactical vest thrown over her shoulders. She moved with that unsettling, unteachable calm, the kind that only came from people who had been here before, in the seconds before things turned deadly. "Breach detected. West perimeter," the intercom barked. Cadets stumbled half-dressed into the hallways. Boots pounded against steel floors. Someone yelled for a count. Another shouted about the armory. And then a single voice cut through the noise. "Lockdown Alpha. Secure all sectors." Colonel Hale's voice, sharp, unshaken, commanding. But before anyone could act, a young officer burst into the strategy hall, his face pale under the red glow of emergency lights. "Sir, it's not an external breach." The words hit like a hammer. Hale spun toward him. "Repeat that." Internal sensors triggered. Whoever's inside, they were already here. A silence fell over the room, heavier than the alarms. Marissa didn't hesitate. Hale's eyes met hers, and that single, silent exchange was all it took. "South wing," he ordered. "Take Alvarez, move." Marissa grabbed her gear and was gone before the words had fully left his mouth. Maya Alvarez was right behind her, breath tight, weapon drawn, trying to match Marissa's pace as they tore through the dim, pulsing corridors. "What the hell's happening?" Maya hissed. "Not an attack," Marissa muttered, scanning every corner as they moved. "A probe. Someone's testing us." They slowed near the South Wing junction, where the base's surveillance feeds were housed. The hall was empty. Too empty. Emergency lights flickered against concrete walls, throwing jagged shadows that moved as if alive. Then Marissa saw it. A vent panel just a few feet above the floor, freshly disturbed. "They've been here," she whispered. A sound followed, barely audible, a scuff, a shift of weight. "Step out," Marissa said, her voice cold, weapon raised. For half a second, nothing. Then a figure emerged from the darkness, black fatigues, suppressed sidearm, gear 2 advanced for any Marine unit. He froze, only for a breath. Then he lunged. "Contact," Maya shouted. Gunfire cracked through the hallway. The intruder rolled, evading the shot, and bolted down the corridor. Marissa didn't think. She moved. Sprinting, boots slamming against metal, breath sharp in her chest. The intruder was fast, but she was faster. They twisted through narrow passages, vaulted stairwells, and burst into the lower maintenance wing, a place rarely used, half-lit, half-forgotten. And then he was gone, vanished. Marissa stopped cold, chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. That's when she saw it, a small device clamped to the main security panel, blinking faintly. She ripped it free, turning it over in her hand. It wasn't foreign tech, it wasn't improvised. It was U.S. military issue. Her pulse slowed, her jaw clenched. Someone inside authorized this, she said quietly. By dawn, the alarms had faded. The infiltrators were gone. No casualties, no theft, no explosions, only those planted devices and darker questions. This wasn't an attack, Marissa said, tossing the recovered unit onto the strategy table with a sharp clink. Hale stared at it in silence. No, he said, they were testing us. The word they hung in the air like smoke. Across the room, Derek Lawson shifted uneasily. The same man who'd spent weeks mocking her now stood with his hands clasped, eyes fixed anywhere but hers. I didn't know, he mumbled. Marissa looked at him. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, just the calm, unreadable gaze of someone who'd seen this kind of regret before. Now you do. The rain came hard that morning, hammering the base with cold sheets that blurred the horizon into mist. Marissa stood beneath the awning outside the command center, watching the storm roll in. The air smelled of iron and memory. The call sign, long buried, long forgotten, was awake again, and someone out there wanted to know if Shadow Viper still remembered who she was. They would get their answer soon enough. The days that followed were a blur of tightened protocols and whispered theories. The base was on high alert. Patrol rotations doubled. Access points sealed. But no one knew where the next blow would come from or if it already had. For most of the cadets, it was their first taste of the unknown. For Marissa, it was like muscle memory. She lived inside uncertainty before. It was where she worked best. At night, she pored over her notebook, sketching possible breach points, decoding subtle patterns in security logs, and cross-referencing the intruders' movements. There was precision in their chaos, purpose hidden beneath the noise. But something still didn't add up. "Why use our own tech?" Maya asked one night, leaning over the table as Marissa reviewed the data again. "Because they want us to know," Marissa replied. "Know what?" "That they're close." Maya frowned. "So this is a warning?" Marissa shook her head. "No, it's a question. They're asking if we're still paying attention." And that question haunted her, because it wasn't just the breach. It was the timing, the pattern, the choice of infiltration points. Whoever they were, they knew the base's skeleton, and they were watching how it would react. Then came the file. It arrived without sender or encryption, buried inside an innocuous maintenance report. A fragment of code disguised as an error log, but Marissa's eyes caught it instantly, an old signal, one she hadn't seen since Dawson Ridge. A challenge, a calling card. Silent Spear Protocol, active. Her blood ran cold. Silent Spear wasn't a mission. It was a unit, blacker than black, off-record, off-book. If Shadow Viper was a ghost, Silent Spear was the shadow the ghost feared. And the fact they were back meant one thing. Whatever game had started at Fort Ironvale was far bigger than any of them realized. The next night the rain stopped, the sky cleared, and the base fell eerily still. Too still. Marissa felt it before the first alarm sounded, a subtle tension, a quiet pressure in the air. She was in the observation deck when it hit. Perimeter sensors flared red. Communications lines blinked out. And then, for the second time in a week, the lights died. But this time, they didn't come back. The compound was plunged into darkness. Her earpiece hissed with static, then a voice, "Colonel Hale. South access compromised, unknown personnel, Shadow Viper authorization granted. Engage." Her pulse steadied. The time for analysis was over. She moved like a phantom through the darkened corridors, Maya at her flank. Every step deliberate, every corner cleared with silent precision. They reached the south wing junction and froze. Three figures, all in black, all armed. They weren't running, they were waiting. Maya's breath hitched. What do we do? We find out what they want. They advanced slowly, weapons raised. One of the intruders lifted his hands, not surrendering, just acknowledging. He spoke, voice distorted by a modulator. Shadow Viper still alive. The sound of her call sign from a stranger's lips made her chest tighten. Who are you? She demanded. Someone who remembers. Before she could react, a smoke charge hissed across the floor. Vision vanished in a gray cloud. Gunfire cracked. Maya ducked. Marissa returned fire, moving low, fast, controlled. When the smoke cleared, they were gone. But something was different this time. They'd left something behind. A single data drive. No encryption, no traps, just a message. Dawson Ridge was only the beginning. It was nearly dawn by the time Marissa stood alone on the perimeter, the cold wind biting through her uniform. The horizon was streaked with pale light, the rain clouds finally thinning. The others thought this was over, that the infiltration was an isolated incident, but deep down she knew better. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of her story again. The one she had buried, the one she swore she'd never have to live twice. And as she looked out into the fog, the words that had once defined her, the ones she had tried so hard to outrun, whispered back into her bones. Shadow Viper, stand by. Because the storm was coming, and this time she wouldn't just be ready for it. She was it. Why did that name, Silent Spear, still echo in the corners of her mind after all these years? Why did it make her chest tighten the way it had on that ridge, when everything that could go wrong did? Marissa Cole had buried that part of her life deep beneath layers of routine and silence. But the message on that unmarked data drive was a blade digging it back up. Dawson Ridge was only the beginning. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of storms. Dawn bled weak light over Fort Ironvale, casting long, fractured shadows through the mist. Marissa stood alone by the perimeter fence, hands buried in her jacket pockets, gaze fixed on the distant tree line. She hadn't slept. She hadn't even tried. Too many questions churned inside her head. Too many ghosts had suddenly decided to speak. Whoever had breached the base wasn't just probing defenses. They were leaving breadcrumbs, deliberate, calculated. They wanted her to follow. And that meant they knew who she was. Cole. The voice behind her was familiar, sharp, but not unkind. Colonel Hale approached, his boots crunching on the wet gravel. He didn't look like a man who'd slept either. Dark circles framed his eyes, and his jaw was set in a grim line. They left you a message, he said without preamble. She nodded once. They know about Dawson Ridge. They shouldn't. I know. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy, not awkward, not hostile, just the kind of silence shared by people who'd survived too much to waste words. Do you think it's them? Hale asked finally. Marissa's brow furrowed. Silent Spear. He nodded. She exhaled slowly, her breath misting in the cold morning air. I don't know, but whoever this is, they're not some freelance mercenary outfit. They knew our systems, our response times, even the layout of the lower wings. That's not casual knowledge. Hale crossed his arms, gaze sweeping the misty tree line. Then we're dealing with someone who has access, someone inside. Marissa didn't respond. She didn't have to. They were both thinking the same thing. Someone in the chain of command had either betrayed them or was playing a deeper game. By midday, Fort Ironvale had shifted from a training facility into a fortress. Patrols doubled again. Restricted zones were locked behind biometric barriers. Data traffic was monitored down to the byte, but none of it eased the tension hanging over the compound. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some cadets believed the infiltration had been staged, a training exercise gone too far. Others whispered about espionage, foreign agents, deep state plots. But no one dared speak the one theory that kept Marissa awake. That this was all about her. She felt it in the glances that lingered a little too long and the silence that fell when she entered a room. It wasn't ridicule anymore. It was fear, curiosity, reverence even. The same people who had mocked her 2 weeks ago now stepped aside in corridors, saluted her without hesitation, and avoided eye contact. But if they thought she wanted their respect, they were wrong. Respect didn't erase the past. It didn't change the weight of the things she'd done, or the ones she couldn't undo. And that past was closer than ever. The first real lead came 3 nights later. Marissa was reviewing drone footage from the night of the breach. Hours of grainy, infrared scans that most analysts would have dismissed as useless. But she wasn't most analysts. At 02:14 frame 3268 she saw it, a flicker of heat, low and fleeting near the northern drainage canal. Too small to be human, too precise to be random. A beacon, a dead drop. And she knew exactly what it meant. "Alvarez," she said, snapping the tablet shut, "gear up." They slipped from the compound under the cover of darkness, their movements masked by a logistics convoy heading north. The perimeter was crawling with patrols, but they avoided them easily, sticking to maintenance tunnels and utility paths most cadets didn't even know existed. The canal was silent, half frozen under the cold night air. And there, wedged into a rusted grate, was a waterproof capsule the size of a thumb. Maya retrieved it, hands steady despite the tension in her eyes. Inside, a single memory stick. Back in the command center, Marissa plugged it into an isolated system. The file contained no data, just a single, encrypted audio message. It was a voice she hadn't heard in years. "Viper," it said, calm, male, familiar. "If you're hearing this, then they found you. We need to talk. Sector Echo 300 hours, alone." Her breath caught. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. But she knew that voice. "Who is it?" Maya asked. Marissa stared at the screen, her chest tight. "His name's Cale." "Friend." "Something like that," she said softly. "Once." Cale Armitage, operative, covert insertion specialist, Silent Spear's second in command, and once a friend closer than a brother. They'd bled together on missions that didn't exist, carried bodies through jungles that weren't on any map. Until Dawson Ridge. Until the day he disappeared, and she never saw him again. Now he was back, and if Cale was alive and reaching out, then whatever storm was coming was bigger than anything she had imagined. At 02:55 she slipped from her quarters without a word. No briefing, no backup, just a sidearm, a suppressed rifle, and the notebook she never went anywhere without. Maya had offered to come, but Marissa refused. If this was a trap, no one else was going down with her. Sector Echo was an abandoned testing ground beyond the perimeter. A skeletal grid of concrete towers and half-collapsed bunkers, forgotten by everyone except those who needed places like it to remain forgotten. She moved through the ruins like a ghost, every sense sharpened. The air was cold, the silence thicker than the dark. And then a shift, a faint crunch of gravel. "Still light on your feet," a voice said behind her. She spun, weapon raised. Cale stepped from the shadows, hands raised in a loose gesture of peace. Time had carved lines into his face, but the eyes were the same, sharp, knowing, dangerous. "Easy, Viper," he said with a small grin. "It's just me." Her grip didn't loosen. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you." Silence stretched between them. Years of unspoken history hung heavy in the air, betrayals, regrets, choices that had cost them pieces of themselves. "Why now?" she asked finally. "Because it's starting again," Cale said. "And this time it's not Dawson Ridge, it's bigger, global. And they're not just testing you, they're testing the entire system." Who? You know who. Her chest tightened, silent spear. Cale nodded. They never disbanded, Marissa. They went dark, deep. And now they're coming back with new funding, new orders, and a list of targets that ends with Fort Ironvale. Why? Because they believe the system is broken, that it needs to be reset, and they want you on their side. She stared at him, heart pounding. And if I say no? Cale's smile faded. Then they'll come for you, and they won't stop this time. For a moment, the wind was the only sound between them. Then he stepped closer, his voice low, almost pleading. I'm giving you a choice, Viper. Walk away now and disappear, or help me stop this before it's too late. She holstered her weapon slowly, the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. You know I can't walk away. Cale's smile returned, sad, knowing. I was hoping you'd say that. He slipped something into her hand, a data chip, thin and cold. Start here, he said. It's everything I know, but be careful. If you dig too deep, they'll see you coming. And just like that, he was gone. Marissa stood alone in the ruins, the data chip burning like a promise in her palm. The storm was closer than ever now, and whatever waited on the other side, she knew one thing for certain. They hadn't just come for Shadow Viper. They had come for Marissa Cole. And this time she was done running. What was on that chip that made Marissa's hands tremble? Why did something as small as a sliver of metal feel heavier than every weapon she had ever carried? It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something deeper, something she hadn't felt since Dawson Ridge. A sense that whatever waited inside that data file would change everything. Back in her quarters, the rain had started again, a slow, steady percussion against the reinforced glass. The compound was quiet, asleep, oblivious. But Marissa Cole sat awake at her desk, the glow of a secured terminal washing pail light across her face. The chip slid into the reader with a faint click. The screen flickered once. Then lines of encrypted code cascaded down like falling rain. Layer after layer of firewall peeled back beneath her hands. Whoever had built this encryption knew what they were doing, Cale's signature all over it. Complex, elegant, almost poetic. And then the first file opened. At first glance, it was just a list. Names, coordinates, dates. But as she scrolled further, the pattern became horrifyingly clear. Operation Echelon. A classified strategic realignment protocol. Targets weren't enemy bases or insurgent strongholds. They were allied installations, U.S. military infrastructure, communications hubs, weapons depots, even civilian supply lines. Silent Spear wasn't planning an assault. They were planning a controlled collapse, destabilizing the very system they had once sworn to protect. Marissa leaned back, staring at the screen in silence. Reset the system. That's what Cale had said. They weren't fighting the enemy anymore. They were declaring war on the Foundation itself. And she understood now why they had breached Fort Ironvale. It wasn't random. It wasn't about testing defenses. It was about sending her a message: join us or stand in our way. Jesus, Maya Alvarez's voice broke the silence behind her. Marissa turned. Maya stood in the doorway, still in uniform, eyes fixed on the terminal. You shouldn't be here, Marissa said quietly. You shouldn't be doing this alone. Marissa sighed. She had forgotten how determined Maya could be. She tried to keep her at a distance to protect her from what this might become. But Maya was sharper than most and far too stubborn to walk away now. What is this? Maya asked, stepping closer. It's not a breach, Marissa replied. It's a coup. Maya's brow furrowed. Silent Spear. Not just them. Look at the routing codes. These aren't rogue ops. Some of this intelligence came from inside the Pentagon. The words tasted bitter. They confirmed what Marissa had feared most. This wasn't a splinter group. This was an infection inside the system. So what do we do? Maya asked. Marissa stared at the terminal. There was no manual for this, no procedure. If she reported it, the data would disappear before the ink dried on the report. If she went rogue, she'd be branded a traitor before sunrise. There was only one option. "We find out who's behind it," Marissa said, "and we stop them." The investigation started quietly, carefully. Marissa and Maya moved in the spaces between official channels, digging through encrypted networks, intercepting unauthorized transmissions, tracing supply movements that didn't match official manifests. Every breadcrumb they found led deeper into a web of betrayal that stretched far beyond Fort Ironvale. Contracts awarded to shell companies that didn't exist, supply drops to coordinates that weren't on any map, deployment orders with no corresponding units. It was everywhere. And one name kept appearing in the data: Project Ravelin. At first, it looked like a weapons initiative. But the more Marissa dug, the more it revealed itself to be something far worse: a multi-phase contingency plan designed to dismantle the global command structure in 3 stages. Fragment, disrupt communications and logistics to isolate units. Destabilize, orchestrate controlled conflicts to weaken alliances. Reconstruct, rebuild under new leadership, leadership that answered only to silent spear. It was brilliant, terrifying, and if even half of it succeeded, everything she had spent her life defending would collapse from the inside out. "What's the timeline?" Maya asked one night as they pored over intercepted transmissions. "6 months, Marissa replied grimly. "Maybe less." Maya's face paled. "Then we have to tell someone. Hale, command someone." Marissa's eyes stayed fixed on the screen. "And who do we trust? The chain of command might already be compromised." It was the question she hated most, because it had no answer. The first real break came 2 weeks later. An intercepted courier signal, heavily encrypted, heavily disguised, pointed to a high-level meeting scheduled at a remote logistics hub in the Nevada desert. The sender, a name that made Marissa's stomach turn: Cale Armitage. "It's a trap," Maya said immediately. "Maybe," Marissa replied. "Or maybe it's a chance to end this before it starts." "Alone?" "No, this time we go together." The night before they left, Marissa found herself in the training hall long after lights out. The building was silent, empty, haunted by echoes of shouted commands and clashing boots. She walked the length of the floor slowly, fingertips brushing the cool steel of the support beams. She remembered the first time she'd set foot in a place like this, young, eager, naive. She believed then that strength meant certainty, that right and wrong were clear lines you could walk without ever crossing. But the years had taught her differently. Strength wasn't certainty. It was the courage to move even when the ground beneath you shifted. "Couldn't sleep." Hale's voice echoed softly from the doorway. Marissa turned. He looked older than usual, tired, worn. The weight of command had etched deeper into his face. "I heard about your little investigation," he said. Marissa stiffened. "Then you know what we're dealing with." "I do." He stepped closer, eyes hardening. "And I know what happens if you're caught digging where you're not supposed to." "Then court-martial me," she said quietly. "But I won't stand by while they burn it all down." Hale studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. It was faint, almost sad. "Good," he said, "because I'm not going to stop you." Her eyes widened. "I've been tracking them too," Hale said. "Longer than you think. I couldn't trust anyone else, but you," his voice softened. "You've always been the one they feared most, and that's why they want you." "Then they're about to regret it," Marissa murmured. Hale nodded. "I'll cover what I can, but once you step off this base, you're on your own. If you're caught, I won't be able to save you." "I don't need saving," she said, and this time there was steel in her voice. The night was cold when they boarded the transport, the stars sharp and distant over the Nevada desert. No insignia, no manifests, just 2 soldiers and a mission no one would ever acknowledge. As the rotor blades thundered overhead and the landscape blurred beneath them, Marissa stared out into the darkness, her reflection faint in the cabin window. She wondered how it had come to this, a lifetime spent defending a system now rotting from within. But then she remembered Dawson Ridge, 12 men walking out alive when they weren't supposed to, and she remembered why she had stayed. It wasn't for medals, or ranks, or even loyalty to a flag. It was for them, the ones who believed in something worth saving. And that was why she couldn't turn away now. As the aircraft dipped toward the desert floor, Marissa reached for her rifle and felt the familiar weight settle against her shoulder. The same weight she had carried through jungles, mountains, cities, and battlefields that didn't officially exist. This wasn't a mission anymore, it was a reckoning. "Shadow Viper," Maya said quietly beside her, "you ready for this?" Marissa's gaze didn't waver. "I was born for this." And somewhere, deep in the darkness below, Silent Spear was waiting. Why did the air feel heavier the moment the desert came into view? Why did Marissa's heart pound with that familiar, measured rhythm, not fear, not adrenaline, but something colder and older, the instinct that lives in soldiers who have danced with death too many times? The horizon stretched endlessly beneath the transport's shadow, a sea of sand and rock bathed in moonlight. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of official maps, Silent Spear was gathering, and tonight they would finally step out of the shadows. The transport banked low, rotors kicking up waves of dust as it descended into a dead valley carved between jagged ridges. From above, the site looked abandoned, a scattering of ruined hangars, rusting towers, a forgotten scar from the Cold War era. But Marissa knew better. Dead places were useful. They were quiet, unmonitored, and easy to hide in plain sight. "This is it," Maya said, tightening the strap on her vest as the skids touched down. Marissa's eyes swept the landscape, every angle, every shadow, every possible exit. "Stay sharp. Nothing about this is going to go the way it's supposed to." They disembarked without a word. The transport vanished into the dark, leaving them alone beneath a starless sky. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the low moan of wind over steel and sand. Marissa knelt briefly, gloved fingers brushing the ground. Tire tracks fresh. Heavy vehicles. Multiple. "They've been here recently," she murmured, "and they didn't come on foot." The ruins stretched before them like a skeletal graveyard, twisted metal bones jutting out of the earth. Marissa led the way, moving low and deliberate, every step calculated. This wasn't a battlefield. It was a trap waiting to spring. They reached the edge of a crumbling hangar and paused. Ahead, faint light glowed through cracked concrete walls, cold, sterile, artificial. "Movement," Maya whispered, raising her binoculars. 2, no, 3 guards. Pattern patrol, 30-second rotation." Marissa nodded. "They're professionals." "Silent Spear." "Has to be." They waited for the gap, then slipped through the shadows, ghosts on the wind. A breach in the hangar's side door offered silent entry. Inside, the air was cooler, the smell of oil and gunmetal heavy. Banks of servers hummed softly against one wall, feeding streams of encrypted data to somewhere far beyond this place. And in the center of the cavernous space, a meeting. 8 figures gathered around a steel table lit by a single hanging lamp. Tactical gear, clean weapons, no insignias, but Marissa recognized the posture, the discipline. These were not mercenaries. These were soldiers, highly trained, deeply embedded, and completely off the books. At the head of the table stood Cale Armitage. He was unchanged and yet entirely different. The same controlled posture, the same calm focus. But there was something colder in his eyes now, something hardened by belief. Marissa watched from the shadows as he spoke, voice steady, deliberate. "Phase 1 is nearly complete. The infrastructure nodes in Europe and East Asia are already under our control. Phase 2 begins in 3 weeks. Communications will collapse, alliances will fracture, and when they come looking for leadership," his gaze hardened, "they'll find us." A ripple of assent moved through the group. Maya's breath caught. They're really going to do it. Marissa didn't answer. She already knew. And if Cale was right, the collapse of the old order wasn't a possibility, it was an inevitability. One of the operatives spoke, and the Cole situation. Marissa froze. Cale didn't look up. She's here. Every muscle in her body went rigid. She's predictable, he continued. She won't run, she won't hide, and when she comes for us, and she will, we'll make her see what we're building. Maya looked at Marissa, eyes wide. He knows. Marissa exhaled slowly. Good. Because now the waiting was over. She stepped from the shadows, rifle raised, voice cutting clean through the silence. Then let's skip the formalities. 8 rifles turned in unison, barrels snapping toward her, but Cale didn't flinch. If anything, he smiled. Hello, Viper. Cale, you shouldn't be here. Neither should you. For a heartbeat, the room was a frozen tableau, 9 operators locked in a delicate balance of violence and history. Then chaos erupted. The first shots cracked like thunder, shattering the quiet. Marissa dove behind a steel beam as sparks exploded across the wall beside her. Maya returned fire, dropping one operative before rolling for cover. The room dissolved into controlled chaos, muzzle flashes strobing through darkness, shouts cutting through the echo of gunfire. Marissa moved like a ghost, low and fluid, switching positions with precision honed over years of missions that never officially happened. She tagged another target center mass, then a third with a controlled double tap. But they were disciplined, too disciplined. Their formation never broke. Their advance was measured, coordinated. They're not trying to kill us, Maya shouted over the noise. Marissa knew. The shots were tight, contained, designed to pin, not end. They wanted her alive. A flashbang exploded against the far wall. Light and sound crashed over her. She hit the ground hard, vision swimming, ears ringing. Shapes closed in boots, rifles, shadows. Don't, Maya hissed, trying to rise. A rifle butt slammed into her side, sending her sprawling. Easy, Cale's voice came through the chaos. Calm, steady, icy. A black hood dropped over Marissa's head. The world disappeared. When consciousness returned, it was to the hum of an engine and the sway of motion. Her wrists were bound. The hood was gone. She was in the back of an armored transport, hands zip-tied, 2 silent spear operatives seated across from her. Maya was beside her, bruised but awake, her eyes searching Marissa's for answers she didn't have. Cale sat across from them, his rifle propped casually against his knee. I told you this was bigger than you, he said quietly. And I told you I wasn't going to walk away. He smiled faintly. You were always stubborn. Call it loyalty. Loyalty, his tone sharpened. To what, Marissa? A broken system that devours its own. A flag flown over endless graves. You think what we're doing is treason. It's salvation. She stared at him, calm but unyielding. You're not saving anything. You're burning it to the ground because you're too afraid to fix it. Cale's jaw tightened. You still don't see it. The system isn't broken. It's rigged. Controlled by men who send soldiers to die while they sleep in warm beds. We're just giving the world back its agency. And how many people have to die before you call it balanced? Silence heavy, measured. I'm offering you a choice, Cale said finally. Join us. Help us rebuild this the right way, or stand in our way and be crushed by the very thing you're trying to protect. Then crush me. The words were soft, but they cut like steel. Cale's eyes narrowed. For the first time, the confidence faltered. He looked at her not as an enemy, but as the one person who might still stop him. Stubborn, he repeated, always stubborn. The vehicle jolted, slowing. The rear doors hissed open. Cold night air flooded in. They were at another facility, larger, fortified, crawling with guards. Maya shot her a glance. What now? Now, Marissa whispered, a ghost of a smile tugging at her lips. Now we stopped pretending this was ever about choices. They were dragged into a concrete chamber deep beneath the compound, a war room built in shadows. Screens lined the walls, each streaming live feeds from installations across the world. Communications hubs, command centers, weapons silos. Project Ravelin was already in motion. "This is the future," Kale said, gesturing to the screens. "Whether you help us or not." Marissa looked around the room. Guards, cameras, data lines. And then a single panel, small and out of place, pulsing faintly behind a row of terminals. She memorized its location without a word. Because even if they had her bound, even if they believed they had broken her, Marissa Cole's Shadow Viper wasn't done. The mission wasn't over. It was just getting started. Why did it feel like the walls themselves were listening? Why did the silence in that underground facility feel heavier than any battlefield Marissa had ever fought on? It wasn't fear that tightened in her chest now, it was clarity. She was deep behind enemy lines, surrounded, bound, and isolated. But she wasn't powerless. Not yet, and not ever. The chamber they had thrown her into was little more than a steel box 12 feet by 12 feet, no windows, one reinforced door and a single camera blinking red in the corner. Maya was gone. They had separated them within minutes of arrival. Classic isolation tactic. Break the bond, fracture the resolve. It wouldn't work. Marissa sat on the cold metal bench, head bowed, breathing slow and deliberate. On the outside she looked still, defeated even. But on the inside her mind was racing, mapping the facility, cataloging guard rotations, tracing every sound that echoed down the hall beyond that door. A faint vibration in the floor, heavy machinery 2 levels below. Intermittent footsteps patrol, 2 guards, one lighter step slightly off rhythm, an old injury. Scraping metal every 47 seconds, hydraulic locks, probably door resets. Everything was data, and data was survival. The door hissed open. Kale stepped in, hands behind his back, his expression unreadable. "Still stubborn, I see." Marissa didn't look up. "Still a zealot, I see." Kale chuckled softly and sat across from her. "You always had a sharp tongue. I missed that." "Spare me the nostalgia," she said flatly. "Why am I still alive?" "Because I'm not your enemy." "You sure about that?" Kale leaned forward. "I don't want to kill you, Marissa. I want you to understand. You think this is about power, about revenge. It's not. It's about evolution. Governments have failed. Institutions have rotted from the inside. We're giving humanity a chance to start over. By destabilizing the world. By tearing out the cancer before it kills the host." Marissa met his gaze, unflinching. "You're not a surgeon, Kale. You're an arsonist. And you've forgotten that fire doesn't care what it burns." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, a flash of doubt, quickly buried. "You'll see," he said finally, rising to his feet. "When the dust settles, you'll thank me." He turned to leave but paused at the door. "Oh, and before you ask, your friend Alvarez is alive. Cooperative even, you'd be proud." The door slammed shut. Marissa exhaled slowly. Maya was alive, that was good. But cooperative could mean anything: coerced, manipulated, broken. And the fact that Kale mentioned it meant he wanted her thinking about it. Fine, let him. Because while Kale was busy preaching about evolution, she was already planning his extinction. 3 hours later the guards came, 2 of them. Standard escort formation, one ahead, one trailing. They led her down a maze of corridors deeper into the facility. The deeper they went, the colder the air grew, the louder the hum of machinery became. Then she saw it. The nerve center. A vast control chamber stretched out before her, dominated by rows of terminals and towering screens. Digital maps of the world glowed in shifting blues and reds. Communication nodes, strategic networks, critical infrastructure points, all flagged, all monitored. And there, standing before the largest display, was Kale. Beautiful, isn't it? He said, gesturing to the screens. The architecture of control. Every war, every revolution, every empire, all of it comes down to this. Who owns the flow of information? And in 3 weeks we will. You're insane. Insane, he smiled. Maybe, but history is written by those willing to do what others call madness. He turned back to the screens. You see those, he pointed to a cluster of red dots. Those are nuclear command relays. Those, another cluster, are global communications nodes. And those, his voice softened. Those are civilian supply chains, all of it under our control. Marissa scanned the room. Cameras. 6 visible, 2 likely hidden. Access points. 4 terminals, 2 secondary relays. Security personnel, 5 all armed, all watching. Every detail mattered, because she was going to burn this place down from the inside. Cale stepped closer, lowering his voice. You have a choice, Marissa. Help us rebuild this world, or die protecting a system that doesn't deserve saving. Still clinging to that ultimatum, she murmured. You really haven't changed. Neither have you, he smiled faintly. That's why I always admired you. Even when we were enemies, I respected you. We're not enemies, she said. We're on different sides of the same coin. The difference is I still believe people can change without being controlled. Then you're a fool. Maybe, she leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper, but you're underestimating me, again. Something in her tone made Cale hesitate, but before he could respond, the guards hauled her away. They took her to a new cell this time, larger, more secure, but still a cage. They thought it was a show of control. To Marissa, it was an opportunity. The first crack in the armor came that night. At precisely 02:14, the same minute the breach at Fort Ironvale had occurred, the lights in her cell flickered once, twice. A pattern, 3 short, 2 long. Maya. Marissa's chest tightened. The signal was crude but unmistakable Morse. Maya was alive, and she was close. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short. CAN. She pressed her hand against the wall and tapped back. WHERE. Silence, then SECTOR4. Sector 4. The auxiliary maintenance wing. If Maya was there, she was near the primary power relays, and if she could reach them, they had a chance. Now all Marissa had to do was get out. The next morning the guards made a mistake. It was small, a half-second lapse, a lazy movement during the routine transfer, but small was all she needed. As they pulled her from the cell, she stumbled deliberately, drawing the rear guard closer. His grip tightened on her arm, too close, too personal. She twisted, weight shifting, body moving like water. One precise motion. One clean disarm. The guard hit the ground before he knew what had happened. Marissa pivoted, driving an elbow into the second's throat before he could raise his weapon. 2 down. No alarms. She dragged their bodies into the cell, stripped one of a security keycard and earpiece, and stepped into the corridor. Shadow Viper was loose. The halls were a labyrinth, but she had memorized enough of the layout during her escorted tour to navigate. Sector 4 was 3 levels down, past 2 security checkpoints. She moved quickly, silent as a shadow, slipping through blind spots and camera-dead zones with surgical precision. Every corner brought danger, a patrol here, a surveillance drone there, but she was always one step ahead. Years of field work had honed her instincts to a razor's edge, and tonight they were sharper than ever. Finally she reached it, Sector 4. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and there, crouched over an open access panel, was Maya. The relief that surged through Marissa's chest was almost painful. Took you long enough, Maya whispered. You left the light on, Marissa replied with a faint smile. Together, they got to work. The maintenance relay before them was the beating heart of the facility's security grid. If they could override it, they could blind Silent Spear's surveillance long enough to make a move. 15 seconds, Maya murmured, soldering wires with quick, steady hands. Then we go dark. Marissa kept watch, weapon drawn, ears straining for any sign of approaching footsteps. Her pulse was steady, her breathing calm, and for the first time since her capture, she felt control sliding back into her hands. 3, 2, 1. The lights across the facility flickered, cameras died, alarms glitched. They were invisible. "Time to move," Marissa said. "Where?" "The nerve center. We're taking their system down." They moved like wraiths through the dark, slipping between blind spots, bypassing sealed doors, neutralizing patrols with quiet, efficient precision. The facility's heart lay ahead, the control chamber that Cale had shown her. And when they reached it, they wouldn't just sabotage it. They would erase it. For years, Silent Spear had hidden in the shadows, pulling strings and rewriting the rules of war. But tonight, Shadow Viper would write the ending. And somewhere deep inside her chest, beneath the scars and silence, Marissa felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The kind of hope that comes not from believing you'll win, but from knowing that losing isn't an option. Why did the silence feel so loud as they approached the control chamber? Why did every shadow look like a threat, every heartbeat like a countdown? Marissa Cole had been in dozens of operations, raids, rescues, extractions that weren't supposed to exist, but this one was different. This wasn't about saving lives or retrieving intel. This was about stopping an idea, a virus, a belief that if you burn the world down, you get to rebuild it in your image. And the men and women in this place, they believed. The corridor leading to the heart of Silent Spear's facility stretched before them like the throat of a beast, long, steel, dimly lit. Marissa and Maya moved with deliberate silence, every step measured, every glance calculated. The security systems were blind now, thanks to the relay override. Cameras dead, motion sensors looping. But that advantage wouldn't last. Once the system rebooted, they'd have minutes, maybe less, to finish what they came here to do. "How many do you think are inside?" Maya whispered, hand tight on her weapon. "Enough," Marissa murmured, "but it doesn't matter." "Why not?" "Because we're not here to fight them. We're here to end this." The door to the control chamber loomed ahead, reinforced titanium, biometric locks, encrypted access. Marissa swiped the stolen keycard across the panel. A red light flashed. Access denied. "Figures," she muttered. Maya crouched beside the control pad, prying the panel open with a field knife. "I can bypass it." "How long?" 30 seconds. "Make it 15. Maya shot her a look but didn't argue. Her hands moved fast, wires sparking under her fingertips. Marissa kept her rifle trained on the corridor behind them, every sense stretched to its limit. Somewhere deep in the facility, klaxons began to wail, distant, faint, but growing. The system was rebooting. Their window was closing. "Got it," Maya hissed. The door slid open with a low hiss. They stepped inside. The chamber was larger than Marissa remembered, an industrial cathedral of steel and light. Dozens of terminals glowed beneath towering tactical displays. Streams of encrypted data pulsed across them like veins of light. And at the center of it all, standing before a central console, was Cale Armitage. He didn't look surprised. If anything, he looked almost proud. "I knew you'd come," he said softly. "Then you know how this ends," Marissa replied, weapon leveled at his chest. "Do I?" He turned toward her, hands clasped calmly behind his back. "Because from where I'm standing, you're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time." Figures began to emerge from the shadows, a dozen, maybe more, all armed, all Silent Spear. They formed a semicircle around the chamber, rifles trained, fingers poised. Maya shifted beside her, breath quickening. "We're surrounded." Marissa's voice didn't waver. "We were always going to be." Cale stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to do this, Viper. It doesn't have to end in blood." "Then shut it down." "You know I can't." "Then you already made your choice." Something in her tone made him pause. For a heartbeat, the room was still. The operatives didn't move. Maya didn't breathe. Even the hum of the servers seemed to fade. Then Cale spoke again, softer this time. "Do you remember Dawson Ridge?" The question hit like a punch. Marissa's breath caught. Memories she'd buried deep clawed their way to the surface. The rain, the mud, the smell of blood and smoke. The 12 Marines trapped behind enemy lines, the desperate push to get them out. And the moment she'd thought Cale was dead. "I remember," she said quietly. "Do you remember what we swore to each other that day? That we'd never let anyone use us like tools again." "And that's exactly what I'm doing here," Cale said. "I'm keeping that promise. No more pawns, no more disposable soldiers. We build something new, something that answers to no flag, no government, no corruption." Marissa shook her head. "You're not freeing people, Cale. You're enslaving them to your vision of the world. Someone has to make the hard choices. And someone has to stop them when they go too far." His jaw tightened. "Then we're at an impasse." "No," she said softly, "we're at the end." With a flick of her wrist, she tossed a small device onto the floor, a compact EMP charge no larger than a fist. It clattered against the metal and began to hum. Cale's eyes widened. "What have you done?" "Level the playing field." The pulse exploded in a flash of blue light. The chamber plunged into darkness. Screens died. Weapons clicked uselessly as electronic systems crashed. Alarms wailed and then fell silent. "Now," Marissa hissed. Maya moved first, dropping 2 guards with precise, controlled bursts. Marissa followed, flowing through the chaos like water, each shot deliberate, each movement calculated. The silent spear operatives were skilled, but without their tech, they were disoriented. Cale ducked behind a console, drawing a sidearm. Marissa closed the distance, disarming another guard and hurling the weapon across the room. Sparks erupted as a terminal exploded nearby, showering the floor in shards of glass and steel. "Fall back," someone shouted. "Hold the line," another barked. The fight was brutal, close, chaotic. Hand-to-hand clashes broke out amid the smoke and darkness. Maya slammed a guard into a bulkhead. Marissa ducked beneath a swing, countering with a brutal elbow to the jaw. Bodies hit the floor. Boots scraped against metal. And then it was just her and Cale. He stood at the far end of the chamber, pistol raised, chest heaving. The muzzle was steady, so were her hands. "Don't do this," he said. "You already did," she replied. "You'll kill me." "I don't want to." "Then don't." Silence stretched between them, heavy and taut. They stared at each other, 2 sides of the same coin, forged in the same fire, standing on opposite ends of a war neither truly wanted. "Tell me one thing," she said quietly. "When did you stop believing we were the good guys?" Cale's lips parted, but no words came. His hand trembled just slightly. And that was enough. Marissa moved. 2 shots cracked through the chamber. Cale staggered, dropping his pistol, a crimson bloom spreading across his shoulder. He hit the floor hard, breath ragged. "Secure him," Marissa ordered. Maya was already moving, binding his wrists with a zip tie. "It's over," Marissa said. Cale coughed, blood staining his lips. "You think this ends with me?" "No," she said, kneeling beside him. "I think this ends with us." His eyes burned into hers, defiant, bitter, but not without respect. "You were always better than me." "No," she whispered. "I was just willing to stay human." By the time the system rebooted, the fight was over. Silent Spear's command network was offline. Their operatives were disarmed and detained. And for the first time in years, the organization that had lived in the shadows was exposed to the light. The cleanup took hours. Reinforcements, loyal, verified, trusted, stormed the facility and secured every sector. Hale arrived by dawn, stepping over spent casings and shattered screens as he approached Marissa. "Shadow Viper," he said, voice low but proud, "you did it." "Not yet," she replied. eyes drifting to the unconscious figure of Cale being loaded onto a medevac. They'll have contingencies, safe houses, funding, cells we don't even know about. Hale nodded. Then we hunt them down, every last one. Marissa stared at the rising sun filtering through the broken roof. It was beautiful, peaceful, and yet she knew this wasn't the end. It was a pause, a breath before the next battle. "Do you regret it?" Hale asked. She thought of Dawson Ridge, of the faces of the Marines she'd saved, of Cale's words and the ideals that had once united them, of the lines they'd both crossed. "No," she said softly, "because if I didn't fight for what's right, even when it's messy, even when it hurts, then everything we've lost means nothing." Hale's hand came to rest on her shoulder. "Then maybe that's why you're still standing." Hours later, as the sun climbed higher and the last of Silent Spear's resistance crumbled, Marissa stood alone on a ridge overlooking the desert. The wind tugged at her uniform. Her rifle hung loosely at her side. Maya approached quietly. "It's over," she said. "For now." "What happens next?" Marissa looked out across the horizon, the same horizon she'd watched 100 times before on missions, on bases, on battlefields. It always looked the same, but this time it felt different. "Next," she said, "we rebuild, and we make sure it's worth saving." Maya smiled faintly. "And after that?" Marissa's gaze hardened, her voice dropping to a whisper. "After that we prepare, because someone somewhere will try this again. And when they do," she adjusted the patch on her shoulder, faded, frayed, but still proud, "Shadow Viper will be waiting." Why did the silence after the battle feel heavier than the fight itself? Why did the absence of gunfire, the lack of sirens, the stillness of the desert wind make Marissa's heart ache more than the chaos ever had? It wasn't the adrenaline wearing off, it was the weight of everything that had come before. The choices, the losses, the truths that could never be unlearned. The facility was quiet now. Where once Silent Spear's operatives had moved with machine-like precision, now there were only secured detainees and exhausted soldiers sweeping the remains of their command hub. The servers were dead, the screens dark, the dream of a new world order shattered before it ever began. But victory had never felt so complicated. Marissa stood near the main entrance, helmet under one arm, wind tugging at the loose strands of her hair. Her uniform was streaked with soot and dust, torn from close combat, and her eyes, those calm, sharp eyes that had stared down death more times than anyone should, were distant, watching, waiting. "You're doing that thing again," Maya said softly, stepping up beside her. "What thing?" "Pretending you're fine." Marissa almost smiled. "Maybe I am." "No," Maya said, shaking her head. "You're thinking about all of it. Dawson Ridge, Cale, everything that led here." Marissa's gaze didn't shift. "You don't walk through fire and come out unchanged. It leaves a mark, even when you win." Maya was quiet for a moment. "We did the right thing." "Yes," Marissa's voice was steady, but there was a heaviness to it. "But the right thing is rarely the easy thing, and it's never clean." They stood there in silence, side by side, as the morning sun began to rise. Light spilled over the desert floor, golden and warm, painting the scars of battle in softer tones. It felt almost peaceful, a cruel contrast to the storm that had raged here just hours before. "Command wants you debriefed as soon as we're back," Maya said after a while. "Of course they do. They're also talking about a commendation." Marissa's lips curved faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "They can keep their medals." "Why?" "Because this isn't about recognition," Marissa said quietly. "It's about responsibility." The flight back to Fort Ironvale was silent. Not because there was nothing to say, but because some words were too heavy to speak aloud. Maya dozed against the bulkhead, exhaustion finally catching up to her. Across the cabin, 2 MPs kept watch over Cale, his arm bound tightly where Marissa's bullet had torn through it. He hadn't spoken since the firefight, not a word, just stared out the window with that same unreadable calm. Marissa watched him for a long time, wondering if there was anything left of the man she'd once called friend. The one who'd carried her out of a kill zone with 2 broken ribs. The one who'd sworn they would change the system together. Now they were enemies, not because they hated each other, but because their beliefs had led them down paths that could never intersect again. When Cale finally turned his head, their eyes met. There was no anger there, no hatred, only a kind of weary acceptance. "You were always better at endings," he murmured. Marissa didn't reply. She didn't need to. Fort Ironvale looked different when they returned. Not physically, the same gates, the same parade grounds, the same sharp edges of discipline carved into every corner, but something deeper. A weight had shifted. A truth had been revealed. And for the first time since she'd arrived, the cadets weren't whispering when they saw her. They weren't laughing behind her back. They weren't mocking the medic. They stood straighter, saluted sharper, looked her in the eye with something like reverence. Shadow Viper. The name wasn't a mystery anymore. It was a legend, a lesson. Colonel Hale was waiting for her just beyond the landing pad. He didn't speak when she approached, didn't offer a salute or a handshake. He simply placed a hand on her shoulder and nodded. "You did more than stop them," he said. "You reminded us why we fight." Marissa looked past him, toward the horizon where the desert bled into the sky. "They'll try again," she said. "Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but they will." "I know. And we'll be ready." Hale's grip tightened slightly. "We." Marissa nodded. "I'm not walking away. Not now, not ever." There was pride in Hale's eyes, the kind a commander rarely let anyone see. "Then God help whoever tries to come after us next." The weeks that followed were a blur. Interrogations, debriefings, investigations that reached into the highest levels of command. Silent Spear's network was larger than anyone had imagined, cells buried in governments, corporations, even intelligence agencies. It would take years to root them all out. But their leadership was gone. Their central operation was dead. And their most dangerous asset, Cale Armitage, was behind bars, awaiting a tribunal that would likely never be public. Marissa was summoned to testify. She told them everything, every plan, every infiltration, every name she could confirm. But there were things she didn't tell them, things about Dawson Ridge, about choices made in the shadows, about lines crossed in the name of survival. Those secrets would stay buried, not to protect herself, but because the truth was too complex to fit neatly into a report. And maybe because some ghosts deserved to rest. One evening, weeks later, Marissa found herself standing on the perimeter wall of Fort Ironvale again, just as she had the day this began. The wind was cold, sharp against her face. The horizon stretched endless before her, vast and unknowable. Maya joined her silently, leaning against the railing. "It's quiet tonight." "Too quiet," Marissa said with a small smirk. "Think they're watching us?" "Always." They stood there in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. Finally, Maya spoke again. "What now?" Marissa didn't answer right away. She thought of the path that had brought her here, the ridicule, the whispers, the weight of a name she had tried to leave behind. She thought of Cale and the choices that had torn them apart. She thought of the cadets who now looked at her with respect, and the enemies still out there in the dark. "Now," she said finally, "we train the next generation. We make them smarter, stronger. We make sure they understand that strength isn't just about firepower or rank. It's about knowing who you are and standing by it, even when the world tells you you're wrong." Maya nodded. "And you?" Marissa's gaze lingered on the horizon. "I keep watching, because that's what Shadow Viper does. She watches, she waits, and when the world starts to break again, she's there to hold the line." Maya smiled. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," Marissa said, "but it's necessary." A month later, Fort Ironvale held its annual commencement ceremony, a formal affair where cadets completed their training and received their commissions. Marissa stood at the back of the hall, watching them step onto the stage one by one. Fresh faces, bright eyes. Some of them had mocked her when she arrived. Some had saluted her with trembling hands after they learned the truth. All of them now looked at her differently. When the last cadet walked off the stage, Hale stepped up to the podium. His speech was short, direct, and heavy with meaning. "You will lead men and women into places you cannot imagine," he told them. "You will make decisions that will define lives, and you will carry the weight of them forever. But if you remember anything from your time here, remember this: true strength isn't loud. It isn't arrogant. It doesn't need to boast. It simply is." And then, in a moment no one expected, he turned toward the back of the hall. "Sergeant Marissa Cole," he said, "would you join me?" The room fell silent. She hesitated, then walked forward. The cadets parted as she passed, their salutes crisp and perfect. She stood beside Hale at the podium, unsure what he intended. "Some of you know her story," Hale continued. "Some of you think you do. But what matters is not the missions she's led, the lives she's saved, or the enemies she's defeated. What matters is that when the world tried to break her, when people underestimated her, dismissed her, mocked her, she didn't shout. She didn't beg. She didn't try to prove them wrong with words. She simply acted." He turned to her, his voice softening. "And because she did, we are all safer today." The applause that followed was thunderous. Marissa didn't smile. She didn't bow. She simply stood there, humbled, grounded, and quietly proud. Because this was never about glory. It was about purpose. It always had been. That night, as the base settled into silence and the stars stretched endless above, Marissa walked the perimeter one last time before lights out. The cold bit at her cheeks. The darkness pressed close. And somewhere out there, beyond the fences and the floodlights, she knew someone was already planning the next storm. She smiled faintly to herself. Let them come. She was ready. Because dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't scream or demand recognition. It stands its ground, it endures. And when the moment comes, it simply acts. And so, once again, Shadow Viper would wait in the silence, watching, guarding, ready. For the world she still believed was worth saving.